Behind me is a really cool cinema from the 1930s. And the great thing is, it still operates as a cinema. The artwork on the front is an image of Alexander Pushkin, the Russian writer who this cinema is named after. And the acoustics are incredible. I don't know if you can hear the echo of my voice, but if I stand on my feet, you can probably hear it. So this is quite an old school cinema by the looks of it. Still kept some of its original features. You see those kind of indentations there both sides. Once upon a time a statue would have been there, probably had to guess Stalin on one side and Lenin on the other. This is just in a really small town, and sometimes it's a really small little town so you can still find the good stuff, because I guess there's not the funding there to build big new cinemas and shopping centres, so they still use the old ones from decades ago, and that's fine by me. That's another cool thing about small towns, you get to see things like that. With this cinema behind me, it's a similar problem to what we often find at the Palace of Culture, isn't it? A cool building, but been spoilt by the modern windows. The old sign there is quite important actually, because it's telling us that it's the cinema named after the 40th anniversary of the revolution, so we know that it must have been built in 1957. That is a bust of Kirov in the town named after him, or one of the towns named after him, Kirovgrad. So this building is kind of interesting, isn't it? What I think it probably was originally a multi-purpose building, a palace of culture, maybe even a planetarium, given the rather interesting tower thing on the top, and also doubling up as a cinema. At the moment it doesn't seem to be working, so never mind, we can just enjoy the interesting building from the outside. You see, this is a constant problem. The old cinemas are just disappearing or ceasing to be cinemas in huge numbers. They're actually really hard to find. Although finding Soviet cinemas that are still functioning is quite difficult, it's quite common to find old derelict ones. So we can see quite clearly there, cinema of the energy workers. Again, that's the advantage of coming to these small little towns. You know, in a bigger city, that cinema would have been pulled down decades ago probably, but here in a small town it just sits there on the edge of town and gets forgotten about, and in a way I guess you could argue it's an architectural monument. This was undoubtedly once upon a time a cinema. It's now been converted into a children's entertainment centre. This was the cinema of the little town of Karabash, and this town was built up in the 1930s, and I reckon that's exactly when this cinema was built as well. You can see there quite clearly each side the place where the adverts for the films would have used to have been hung. The name of the cinema there in the middle, Cinema Victory. Okay, the name of the cinema is a bit confusing because it certainly doesn't look like post-war architecture, it looks like pre-war architecture. But it's called Victory, and obviously they're talking about victory in the Second World War. I mean, I guess it could have been built before and then renamed afterwards. But either way, it's certainly not functioning anymore. In fact, looks like it closed down a long time ago. I've already mentioned how in the smaller towns, the cinemas can double up as a palace of culture. And this is another case in point. Certainly from the outside, it looks like quite a good example of Stalinist architecture. What's really cool is tonight, here, they're showing a classic Soviet film from 1969. It's called the Diamond's Arm, and all Russian people know it. It's a much loved favourite, and I get to see it on the big screen. As expected, it seems kind of cool in here. I mean, they have modernised it a lot. It's been done up. So, I mean, you know, that's nice for the local people to come to a modern place. I understand that, especially for the younger people. But obviously, as we've said before, these palaces or these cinemas, or both in this case, they do lose a bit of character, obviously, when they've been modernised so much. So it's the first time I've ever been offered a blanket to keep myself warm during the film, and also the first time I've been asked to wear these rather stylish shoe covers. Just waiting for the film to start now. I think showing an old classic film like that is a really good idea. I don't know why more cinemas don't do that. But it's quite funny, even though the film was from 1969 and it's on some channel or other pretty much every single day, and on top of that you can watch it on YouTube from the official Mosfilm site channel. Despite all that, I still got told off for recording the film. So as is often the case in Russia, common sense wasn't taken into consideration. Let's have a look at some of the cinemas from my Soviet postcard collection which are no longer with us. The dynamically shaped Moscow cinema in Ryazan has now become a marriage registry office. The Kirov cinema in the disputed Donetsk region has now become a supermarket. The Tbilisi cinema in Batumi no longer exists at all, which is a shame, as it's not just the cinema the citizens of the city have lost, but also the wonderful artwork which adorned it. The Salute cinema in Dnipropetrovsk was only demolished a few years ago. In fairness, its heavy style was perhaps a bit out of place in a big modern city. Again, the Screen cinema in Novotroitsk was only pulled down recently. It was the focal point of the town square, but it was seemingly just getting in the way of the regeneration program of the area. More regrettable is the loss of another cinema called The Screen in Stavropol, a classic Soviet modernism job from the 1960s, which no doubt long-term visitors to it were disappointed to see go. The same must surely be said of this stunner in Sochi. What a loss to the resort town this was after it was demolished almost 20 years ago. With a wonderful glass facade which allowed you to view the huge mosaic on the inside and a light airy feel, this has to surely be one of the most beautiful cinemas of the many destroyed since the fall of the USSR.